Hello chess enthusiasts and welcome to my channel. I'm Kestony, a professional chess coach, and today I will guide you through the world of isolated pawn and show you how to use it to dominate the board. We will cover all the necessary strategy and I will explain why so many players underestimate its potential. So let's imagine that you're playing with the white pieces in this position and black has just taken on d4. Think about which piece would you be taking back with the knight, queen, or the pawn. Objectively, it doesn't matter much. In other words, the engine, the almighty computer, would say that whether you take with knight, queen, or pawn, there's a minimal difference. However, when I ask my students, rated from 500 to say 2100, everyone who I have never worked with on the isolated pawn topic, 90% of them would be taking with queen or knight. They do not want to get a pawn island, an isolated pawn in the center of the board, which is potentially a big weakness in the endgame. However, if you ask the grandmasters, if you open up the database and see what grandmasters are playing in this position, 90+% of them would be taking with the pawn. So there's a very clear discrepancy between what amateurs choose and what masters choose. So let's dive into what happens if we take, for instance, with the knight. Over here, white's advantage is temporary lead in development. You could see that we have two pieces out, plus we have castled, black's only one piece out. In other words, that's a dynamic advantage. And in order for you to capitalize on that, you will be required to develop the initiative and then acquire some kind of static advantage, winning a pawn, getting space advantage, winning the bishop pair, something like that, or else with time, the advantage that you have will simply vanish. So for instance, let's say black plays a move like bishop c5, threatening to give you an isolated pawn. You go back because that's not what you want. Bishop goes to d6, and there are already tactical ideas. Like, for example, bishop can take on h2, and if king takes, it could be winning the piece back with a move like queen to c7. So a natural move would be something like h3, say castles, knight c3, knight c6, bishop d2, bishop d7, and this is complete equality. So you somewhere have to find a very dynamic moves that would help you develop that initiative, and that's just hard to do. Whereas instead, if in this position we're taking with the pawn, we're getting static advantage, long-term advantage right away, which is much easier to handle. So what is that advantage? That's called space advantage. Take a look. When I'm taking on d4, my bishop is already opened, whereas the black's bishop is closed. So the dark bishop of mine is happy about this capture. What about the semi-open e-file that I get for my rook? For them, the semi-open e-file does not exist. That's not where their rook is going to be effective. So rook is happy as well. What about the outpost in their position on e5, where my knight later could go to, and it's guarded by a pawn? They don't have an outpost like on e4. So the knight is happy because of that as well. So this pawn provides us the so-called space advantage, and in the middle game, our bishops and knights have higher potential of getting better squares. Now that we understand the benefits of the isolated pawn, let's understand the plans behind the pawn. Usually your plan is going to be depending on where this bishop ends up. If your bishop ends up on d3, you will likely conduct a kingside attack, whereas if the bishop ends up on c4, like in this case, bishop had to take back the pawn, which was taken by the black's pawn earlier in the opening, then you're going to be playing for a very timing break d4 to d5, which will not only get rid of the isolated pawn, but also we'll hope that we get initiative and something out of that initiative for us to be happy about. The black strategy usually involves having a very good grip on the square d5, trying to get to an endgame, and when possible, apply the pressure on the pawn d4. However, black, lacking space, has a lot of problems. If he wants to, for example, blockade the pawn, not only am I going to always be threatening to give him an isolated pawn himself, but also he's blocking the queen and potentially the rooks from attacking d4. So it is very hard for black to be controlling d5 square and attacking d4 because pieces are just getting in each other's way. If you're not blocking it, I could be playing d5. If you're blocking it, you're not effectively attacking it. Also, for black, it is very hard to be exchanging pieces. For example, if I play something like knight c3 and you are taking on c3 my knight, I will change the structure into non-isolated pawn 1, and the endgame is no longer good for black. If I ever go, for example, knight e5, and you're taking my knight there with your own knight, I'll be taking with the pawn towards e5, and that pawn becomes part of this group and is no longer isolated. So it is very hard for black to be exchanging the minor pieces without changing the structure. Let's take a look at the game between two grandmasters from an isolated pawn position. This is a very common middle game that arises out of the isolated pawn. Let's take a look how grandmaster with the white pieces is going to beat 25-50 grandmaster, who is his opponent in this game. Black castles in this game, white plays rook to e1. Very often we're developing the rook before we are developing the dark square bishop. It's simply very clear that the rook belongs here, whereas the position of this bishop, whether it will go to e3, f4, or g5, remains unclear, and so often white stays with the bishop on c1 for quite a bit. Knight goes back to f6. White at any moment could be giving the isolated pawn to black, so it's natural to move away the knight, plus it opens up the queen to aim at d4. a3 is a very common move for white in these positions. There are two reasons for it. Number one is that in some cases we might be preventing this maneuver knight b4, knight d5, which would block the isolated pawn, and other times we're running away with the bishop back to a2 so that we wouldn't be susceptible to all kind of knight a5s in these positions. Black goes a6, they want to finish the development with the fianchetto bishop. White goes bishop a2, and after b5, now it's a perfect moment when white is leading the development, and black has also weakened this diagonal to push for d5. White is not interested in only getting rid of the isolated pawn, they want to develop the initiative and acquire other type of advantages. Takes, 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 and takes. Normally, we wouldn't perhaps be taking with the queen because we want to keep the pieces, which promises more fighting chances. But over here, black cannot take our queen. If they do that, black is going to be losing the piece because the knight and bishop are both under attack. Knight is hanging, and if you defend it, I could take the knight and take the bishop afterwards. So now black goes bishop to b7, and white reveals his main idea to go queen h5, and now white has 1, 2, 3, potentially 4 and 5 pieces against the black's king. Enjoyed the show. Black went queen to c7, white goes bishop g5, exchanging the main guard of the black's king. We have takes and takes, we're threatening h7. Black goes h6, and here a fantastic move by white, rook e3, lifting the rook to join the party and the attack. Of course, black is unable to take the knight because after rook h3, the checkmate threats are inevitable. Black played knight a5 with the idea of coming to c4 to block the attacking bishop of white. White goes queen g6. That's a fantastic pin that helps us to move the queen to g6. Now we're threatening mate, so they must take the knight. White goes rook h3, threatening queen h7. Black goes rook c8, so that the king could be escaping via left side. And now after rook e1, closing the gates and threatening queen h7, black resigns. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider hiring me as your personal online chess coach. Thank you for watching, and let me know if you would like the second or perhaps even the third part, should I expand on the topic of the isolated pawn. See you in the next class.